Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Jeff Strane, and I'm the Senior U.S. Director for Government and Education Affairs for SHI. Today I have the pleasure of talking with Pat McLoughlin, the Executive Director of MD Think with the state of Maryland. Good morning.
Morning, Jeff. How are you?
Good, very good. As the state's first Chief Data Officer, what was your role and what challenges did you face getting started?
Well, when the state CDO position was created, the intention was really to serve as the office and the responsible party for setting the direction and vision for how data management, data governance practices would be operated across the entire executive branch for the state of Maryland. So the focus really was the executive branch of government and those agencies within. Um, Really, what we were looking to focus on was how do we set foundational practices, get
Mhm.
executive buy-in across the various agencies, and really strive to kind of adjust the culture or build the culture that focuses on leveraging data as much as possible to drive the decisions and positive outcomes for Marylanders. The office itself that I was in was one we were based in the governor's office, and we're able to work very closely with each of the agencies because we created an agency data officer position for every agency. So that directly resulted in kind of a one-to-one pipeline of information between the statewide office and each of the data offices within those agencies. Um,
So, I'm curious, how many executive branch agencies are there?
So the specific group we are responsible for included 28. There are more than those, but the 28 account for the larger agencies across the state.
And so to follow up, and this you may have actually already answered, but that how did you encourage that data-driven decision making across all? So you said the 28, but there's even a broader group. So having worked in the state of 22 years in the state of Georgia, it's a hard thing to do.
It is, and I think as you're going to know, Jeff, the level of data maturity for each of those agencies varies wildly. So really, it was a mix between understanding what their overall business objectives were as an agency, right? What are the core outcomes they're looking to deliver? What is their mission? And then how do we identify where are the opportunities where they're leveraging data on a daily basis and maybe know it, but don't know it to the degree that it's really driving the outcomes that they're looking for.
Right.
So being able to lift that up and make sure that winds up being very clear. I think also meeting agencies where they are. So what we don't want to do is overcomplicate what the value of data really means to that agency, and in any way force them to believe that they'll never get there because of their current state. So a lot of it was the balance of what are your overall goals, the outcomes you're looking to drive, and then what is your current state and how do we start to find those key opportunities where we can start to inject maybe more informed decisions by using the data you already have, or starting to look at perhaps other agencies that have data that you could leverage as an agency in order to start to deliver some of the outcomes.
So when you began that journey, how did you kind of get the collaboration either between organizations, agencies, or business units?
So we started with kind of two approaches from a governance perspective. One was creating a statewide organization of all of those agency data officers where we would meet on a monthly basis and structure it really of just kind of talking about high level principles and different initiatives we were looking to drive. And we paralleled that with the first state data plan. So the overall, and this was our data strategy for the state. This was really driven in a way to align certain key outcomes we were looking to see from a statewide perspective, understanding that the journey to get there was going to differ a little bit agency by agency. So by bringing those initiatives to paper essentially and making them kind of easy to read and understand, but repeatable, we're talking about them all the time, bringing the groups together, then we start to hear some stories about where certain agencies are and kind of what the lift is going to be to take on some of those initiatives. In conjunction with that, we then set up regular one-on-one meetings where I would meet directly with the agency data officers and then their respective teams on a monthly basis, and we would just take time working through each of kind of their overall state, what their priorities are, where they feel that there are some challenges, and look to see how we can find kind of more direct approaches and how they can start to kind of fill the gaps or improve their processes to be a little bit more
Well,
data.
it definitely sounds like you had a really good, it was a long journey, but you had kind of the crawl, walk, run philosophy of getting there.
Absolutely.
Now, when you transition the value of data, how do you make that crosswalk over to non-technical folks?
So I think really it starts with, again, the outcomes. Let's understand what your goals are and what you're trying to deliver, and be able to explain in a very clear way how the data is helping. And it may simply be by referencing, the way with which a report gets generated. For example, if there's a particular outcome that an agency is looking to achieve that reduces the level of any measure or increases a level of measure, we're able to tell the story the way they would within their executive leadership meetings or to other agencies. If you think about it from almost like a business to business perspective, and
Mhm.
then sprinkle in there the actual data points of how that's helpful. So in a way to be able to say the reason we got to this outcome or the way we got to this decision was by looking at, these two factors that came from data sets that we used to get here. Not trying to over emphasize or force kind of high level data concepts or technologies or different verbiage into the conversation, rather just almost use it as backup, as a way to kind of reference how you got there is by talking about the data used to get there.
Interesting. Were there any challenges either internally or externally with who owns the data? Is this state data? Is this agency data?
Right. Yeah. So yes, there was very much those conversations around, and terminology is a key thing. I mean, one of the real I think an important factor that we introduced early on was standardizing terminology across the state, because I like to give the example of my one of my very first days on the job. I was talking to a particular agency that was really excited about the data lake they were implementing, and I was like, "All right, let's talk about this. What are you putting in place?" And they're like, "Well, we're just going to rename our SQL Server our data lake." Like, well, that's I love the initiative and the approach, but we're talking about slightly different things
Concept,
there.
yeah.
So one of the things that we as a group decided, it was early on, let's standardize the terminology, so as we begin this journey everyone is always referring to the same terms, or have a point of reference they can go back to if they're asking questions about what that means. So ownership is obviously one of those that becomes a hot topic in any of these organizations. We did have a number of discussions and have continued to work the process of the difference between, all of this is the state's data.
Yeah.
Agencies are responsible for really generating, managing, and curating specific types of data. And we have to define who is the authoritative agency for that data. I think in many government entities, you're going to find multiple agencies tend to start managing very similar data as
Yeah.
their sister agencies. So that was definitely a challenge that we had to try to work our way through, and one that's going to be ongoing. I mean, it's always something that continues to evolve.
And I'm assuming within that you have a hierarchical structure of the golden record. Who owns that golden record?
Correct. So the idea of, and again, a lot of that goes back to a reference of, certain legislation that indicates a particular agency may be responsible for a data type, or a certain data asset. There also are other, federal requirements that result in a particular agency taking on that responsibility.
Very insightful. And I want to thank you for joining me today. And as a close, I'd like to ask everyone to please visit cdlmagazine.tech for additional interviews. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.